Welcome all to the 15th of my weekly presentations. This one is going to be about the service and clean of a very nice Eureka electric clock. These are probably one of the most admired of all electric clocks. Here is the clock as I received it. A very nice tall model with the balance visible below the enamelled porcelain dial on the brass base with normally a large domed glass cover. These were 1906 patented and a limited production run before they failed on the market just prior to the First World War. The clock was in going order, but when you look closely at the frame and the mechanism, it's obvious it's been exposed to the atmosphere and moisture for quite a long time, as the original lacquer has broken down and there is a reasonable amount of rust evident on all of the steel work. These clocks were made to be seen in operation, so it's not unreasonable to expect it to be bright, shiny and clean, devoid of all perished varnish and rust. The rust actually inhibits the correct action of the clock, particularly when it's on the balance spring, as seen here on the left. I mentioned in the introduction to this week's presentation, these clocks on close examination have not been hand finished. Most of the turnings are straight off the lathe. And here now you can see I have completely stripped the base, mirror polished it, lacquered it, and all of the turnings I've put back into the lathe and hand finished them to a high degree of finish, polish and lacquer. A much more beautiful finish than original. The balance that operates in this clock is very heavy, and to carry that load, the front and back pivots of the balance run on these ball races. This is a 2-ball bearing model. Some have 3. There's not much advantage in having a 3rd ball because the pivot sits in between the 2 balls. But they have to be cleaned out. Old rust builds up on the balls. Oil and grease begins to turn into muck. The parts don't wear much, but they do need a good clean out and re-lubrication. Here are some pictures showing my progress through the process of cleaning, polishing, lacquering and reassembling as I go. It's an easy clock to work on. There's very few parts apart from the wheels for indexing the motion work. Continuing the process, you can see the clock is gradually rebuilding with parts hand finished and reassembled. Becoming more and more evident now on how beautiful this clock is going to look when it's finished. So here's the entire frame, base and dial completed, cleaned, polished and lacquered. Now waiting for the balance to be reinstated. Here is the balance. It's a bimetallic strip so that it has temperature compensating properties. It has steel on the inner layer, which here we can see has surface rust and some pitting. The balance spring also, being steel, is surface rust and pitted, and all of this rust must be removed. To dismantle the balance has to be done methodically and systematically because every component, especially the balance screws, have to go back in exactly the same position as they were removed from. Here you can see I have broken the balance down into all of the individual components. The balance screws for each half of the balance are on each side of the picture. all the other components are laid out. Every part has been hand finished, polished and lacquered. The coil has been cleaned, serviced and giving a coat of clear lacquer as well. Even the balance spring has had the rust removed. Here is the fully serviced, de-rusted, cleaned and polished, assembled balance, ready to go back into the clock. And it indeed looks beautiful compared to the original condition. Note also that the silver pin, which takes the power into the coil, must be cleaned and serviced as well to ensure that there's good contact for the passage of the current into the coil when the clock is to be operating. The electrical contact pin on the balance receives its current from this flag contact, which is flexible and mounted to the frame of the clock. The contact pin on the balance touches the silver side on the way up, and on the return trip it bypasses it by passing on an insulated side, as shown on the left in this picture. So, with the balance completely serviced and those contacts cleaned and burnished, the clock is now fully assembled and ready for test running. Here are two short videos that show the clock in operation and just why they are so admired and desired as a collectible clock. Eureka clocks run on 1.5 volts. Not a great deal of voltage for such a clock, and that's the drawback with the Eureka. As the voltage drops in the battery, the amplitude of the balance wheel reduces and timekeeping is affected. The battery used originally was a very large battery called a number 6, and it completely filled the width of the Eureka clock base. No longer available today, but here is a replica. Here is this number 6 replica battery fitted into the base of the clock. Just looking at these pictures of the completed clock, I think you can appreciate the quality of the Eureka and why it's so admired and desired. And they're holding their value well in a market that is reducing dramatically with time. I hope you enjoyed this presentation. The Eureka clock would be a nice addition to anyone's collection. If you have any questions or comments that you'd like to make, you can send me an email to the address shown at the bottom of this page. Thank you and keep safe.